It's my privilege to introduce Dennis Royalty, who is our featured author tonight. Dennis had a 30-year career in newspapers as a reporter and editor. Is he getting feedback? As a reporter and editor. 10 of those years he spent as a city editor of Indiana's largest newspaper, the Indianapolis Star. His memoir, Tips and Tales, an Indiana journalist, reflects on craft and career, gives the reader an insider's perspective on a journalist's adventures, such as his time covering the legendary and controversial Indiana basketball coach Bob Knight, who once threw a basketball at him. And also to something like what it's like to cover a tornado. In addition to the entertaining stories, Dennis weaves his memoir with 11 chapters of writing and editing advice. Dennis is active in Central Arizona Writers, and he moved to Prescott Valley in 2016 with his wife, Ginger. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Lee. I'm on the clock, so I'm going to dive right in. I've mentioned the tornado story, and so my first of a few samples, I'll have a few short ones after this, is from a 24-year-old reporter covering the major disaster. It was April 3rd, 1974. I was a rookie news reporter based in West Lafayette, Indiana. The Indianapolis Star assigned me to a one-person bureau, churning out news of northern Indiana. These were short items mostly, things like faculty raises granted at Purdue University, traffic fatalities, and so forth, break-in stuff. But April 3rd was different, ominous. Not a day for routine reporting. It was raining hard, faucet raining hard, tornado warnings too. So I phoned my boss in downtown Indianapolis, state editor, Ernie Wilkinson. Denny, this looks real bad. Better get to the state police post. Understandable, the West Lafayette State Police Post was the emergency nerve center for a dozen counties. I got drenched scrambling from my Chevelle to the door of the post. Roaring winds made an umbrella useless. Not only that, it was dark outside, twilight light, odd for 3:30 p.m. Inside the post, activity swirled. Police radios chattered and pointed troopers to calls for help. This was no drill. I found a phone and called Ernie. He was about to send me to one of the most jarring experiences of my life. Ernest A. Wilkinson was a devoted, passionate newsman. By the time I worked for him in '74, he was 49 and had been state editor for Indiana's largest newspaper for 14 years. On the way up, he chased hundreds, if not thousands, of deadline stories. Breaking news was Ernie's lifeblood. Now on his desk were reports of a massive tornado outbreak. Ernie knew that Rainsville, a tiny community near the state's western border, was being torn apart. That tornado originated in Illinois and was rampaging through his territory. Ernie also realized that from his experience, most tornadoes travel from southwest to northeast. And 65 miles from where he was sitting, he had a reporter near a likely path, me. Ernie guessed where this powerful storm was heading. He laid a ruler across the state map. Honestly, he did. He knew almost by heart. He was searching for the most populated area on the frightening route. Denny, head for Monticello, call from there. I remember no other conversation at the state police post where troopers were overwhelmed by a ringing switchboard. So it was back to my Chevelle, back to chase a tornado, an excited 24-year-old handed a major story. Danger didn't occur. It was sometime around 4:30 p.m. Monticello, Indiana, population 5,000 plus, is the White County seat hugging the Tippecanoe River. A 40 to 50 minute drive should get me there. Emerging from the furious rainstorm, I learned through radio static that this looked to be a major outbreak. So be alert, be ready to take cover. Still, I saw little evidence of tornado-like weather. Neck craning toward a brighter sky, I saw only clouds sailing at a rapid clip. Maybe halfway there, the sky turned an eerie green, and yet it was calm as I approached Monticello. The time was about 5:30 p.m. On the outskirts, a curiosity. A few cars had parked right in the traffic lane where the highway became a city street. They'd stopped without regard for anyone behind. There were no drivers or passenger in sight. I found out why. Soon, I found out why. Parking off the pavement at the edge of Monticello, I walked into a nightmare. Huge trees had uprooted, many resting on rooftops or ripped through them. Debris littered neighborhood yards and streets, including downed power lines. Now I knew why it was impossible to drive further into the city. I saw cars overturned and others shoved into front yards where they plowed deep gashes into lawns. The few people I saw wore dazed, ashen looks. They were emerging from cover, discovering what had happened to their Monticello. A widespread power outage froze electric clocks at 5:17 p.m. I grasped the chilling reality that the storm had hit fewer than 15 minutes before I arrived. Ernie's directive had placed me moments away from the midst of one of the most destructive tornadoes of the 20th century. Instead, I was about to chronicle its aftermath. I captured all that I could in my notebook as I made my way to the center of the city. Each block seemed more devastated than the last. Weaving through rubble, I was dumbstruck to find the 10-block business area looking like a war zone. The county courthouse, a tall limestone and steel structure that dominated the square for 80 years, was crushed. A direct hit ruined in one horrifying blow an architectural gem and symbol of rock-hard strength. Its clock tower had toppled, its roof destroyed. My training taught me to keep focused, get the who, what, when, where, why, and how, I thought. Surely dozens were killed and hundreds hurt. I needed a voice of authority and found it at a makeshift state police command center. There were many injured. Worst cases were rushed to a local hospital that thankfully hadn't been obliterated. After hours gathering facts and quotes, I realized I must call Ernie by deadline. But this was long before cell phones. Lines were down for miles. Racing to the Chevelle, I drove for a good half hour before I spotted lights in a rural residence. Figuring there'd be a working phone, I pleaded my way to its use and called in my notes. I spent much of the next week in Monticello, filing news stories and using a tiny Instamatic camera to take the first front page photo of my newspaper career. My reporting focused on Monticello's portion of a much larger disaster. The storms eventually were characterized as a super tornado outbreak. In Monticello, roughly 350 were injured, more than $100 million worth sustained in damages. That's $1974. The community had been struck by a tornado classified F4, winds reaching 200 miles an hour, according to the National Weather Service. The big picture was 148 tornadoes affecting 13 states in an 18-hour period, the largest number of tornadoes ever recorded in a single event. The super tornado outbreak caused 159 deaths, 34 in Xenia, Ohio, more than 6,000 injuries. 30 of the 148 tornadoes, 148, rated the highest classifications, F4 or F5. 44 years later, numerous memories remain for me. One came from touring damage with a local official. Amid rubble on the courthouse lawn, I spotted a heavy block cornerstone. Noting its date, I assumed it was from the courthouse. Not so. The official recognized the cornerstone from another smashed building several blocks away. I'm going to stop there, just because I want you to hear some other things, but I will say, that's not the best part of this chapter. It's called Finding Karen. You got to buy the book to figure that out. Karen was one of the victims of the disaster. So with that, how's the time going? 8:14? Okay, I'm still in the Lafayette Bureau for this next story. It's a shorty. Good editors interact with writers when making significant changes to the reporter's copy. Sadly, that didn't happen for me when the Indianapolis Star dispatched me to St. Joe, Indiana, to write a feature about a pickle factory. Someone on the desk changed the dateline on my article from St. Joe, Indiana to St. Joseph, Indiana. Imagine what it's like having to phone managers at Seckler's Pickles after the story appeared, reassuring them that I actually knew where I was when I spent the day with them and that I was capable of spelling the town's name. There's an old saying that applies for editors who think they know better than the reporter on the scene. Who knows it? Assume makes an ass out of you and me. Okay, I'm going to bypass some of them I was going to read, but I want to stay on time. So now it's 8 years later, and believe it or not, the kid has become the city editor and responsible for 50-some reporters. Quite a meteoric rise to fame, so now I'm in my early 30s. I got word that the movie Hoosiers was going to be filmed in Indiana when I was city editor of the Star. Big names, Gene Hackman, Dennis Hopper, and Barbara Hershey, were coming to act in the production about Indiana's beloved sport, basketball. It was clear to me that as the statewide newspaper, we'd have to be all over this story. Incredibly, I couldn't get the sports department interested. This despite the fact that scenes would be filmed across the state using gymnasiums that still look the part of the 1954 state championship won by Milan, a small school. Milan's upset ranked among the top sports stories of the 20th century in Indiana. Hoosiers, I'm sure some of you have probably seen it, was based on that story. This story wasn't just special for Indiana, it was Indiana. So I forged ahead to cover it from our news desk. I wanted a reporter to follow Hoosiers from start to finish, preferably someone who could cover filming on weekends. I selected Scott Miley, a colleague and friend. Miley initially reacted coolly. I'm going to chase a film crew for weeks on something the sports department passed on? His eyes rolled. Scott's mood changed as filming began. His reporting captured the significance of the story and the flavor of Hollywood in rural Indiana. But here's the kicker. One Saturday, Miley appeared in the newsroom wearing a period outfit. Why? The film crew wanted to use him as a reporter, posing a question to Hackman's character. So who's in the credits for what many, including me, consider one of the greatest sports-related films? Scott Miley. So I will go back. I've got a little time, and I will read the one that I had crossed out. I think you'll enjoy this. Back to when I was at Lafayette as the one-person bureau chief. I was driving through the Purdue campus in the late 70s when I noticed a bird fluttering helplessly along the side of the street. Turns out it was a sickly young owl. I pulled over, put it in a cardboard box, and drove to the university's renowned veterinary school. There I was directed to Ron Winterfield, professor of avian medicine. Even Winterfield's expertise in disease and infections in birds couldn't save the poor owl. But meeting him led to a feature story. At the time, there were an estimated 25 million pet birds in the United States, and the professor's comments about their care made for good writing in the Star, I thought. Winterfield had visited the Antarctic to observe penguins. I mentioned that in the story and then realized he could help me in another way. I was serving as program director for a local service club, the Exchange Club of Lafayette. I'm not sure a paper would let you do that now, but back then they encouraged it. How could I lose with this program, a slideshow featuring penguins in Antarctica? Winterfield agreed to appear. I told him ahead of time. The club members, many of them Purdue employees, tended to leave the lunch meeting promptly at 1:30 p.m. to return to their jobs. No problem, Winterfield said. Starting at 1 p.m. would give him plenty of time. Now, I hate to reinforce a stereotype about long-winded instructors, but Professor Ron had a long wind-up and was only on his 4th or 5th slide out of dozens by 1:30. By 1:45, we had only about a third of the exchange clubbers left in the audience, even though I was frantically waving my arms, signaling Ron to speed up. Kind of like, how you'll be doing, Jana? No luck. By 2 p.m., all that was left in the room was me, the professor, and a couple of my friends who were embarrassed to leave early. Winterfield was still going strong, so maybe it is true, at least for avian experts, time flies. So I'm now coming up on my last one, so I'm actually going to get under the clock here, because this is a shorty. Now I'm back to city editor. My newspaper editing responsibilities included appearances at newspaper and education programs for grades 3 to 12 in Indianapolis and the suburbs. Youngsters in the lower grades were the most fun. I tried to lead off each class with a joke suitable to the age group. For the very young, I'd ask, where does a sheep go to get a haircut? At a Baba shop. One day I never made it to the punchline. A kid in the front row blurted, at a clip joint, topped by an 8-year-old. So I still have just a little time left, and I've got copies of my book back here for sale. I've lowered the price to $6. It's that on Amazon.com, or it's $2.99 for Kindle. And some of the other chapters are longer, like the tornado chapter. Finding Karen, she was one of 6 or 7 kids in a church school bus when they had the misfortune of going over the river, the Tippecanoe River in Monticello. And that was when the tornado hit. And the bridge was destroyed and the van went into the water. Somehow she came out the back of the van, managed to crawl to safety, the others all died. And 40-some years later, I interviewed Karen, and that's in the story. So, yeah, it's great to write a book. That's my only book. I'm going to try to work on another one about my wife fostering dogs, which I think will be good fodder, and that might actually be a book that'll sell. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.